The old ship floated silently in the cold darkness of space, its metal frame creaking softly as if whispering forgotten memories. It had been years since anyone had stepped inside, years since its engines had gone silent, now a single small craft approached, its thrusters glowing faintly in the endless black. Inside that craft sat a lone human, a salvage engineer returning to the vessel he once called home. His name was never important to him anymore. Out here, in the empty stretch between stars, names didn't matter, survival did. He needed a spare part to repair his current ship, and the only place to find it was this abandoned relic drifting among the void. The docking clamps locked with a heavy clang. Dust floated in the stale air as the hatch opened. He stepped inside slowly, his boots echoing in the hollow corridors. Everything was as he remembered, but older, colder. A strange weight filled the air, a feeling like the ship had been waiting. He switched on his wrist light, the beam cutting through layers of darkness. His breath sounded loud in the silence. Too loud, he frowned and paused. Had something just moved ahead? He told himself it was just the old metal shifting, but his instincts whispered something else. He walked deeper into the corridor, the air smelling faintly of burnt wires and rust. The storage bay was where the parts should be, but before reaching it, he froze, a sound soft and sharp at the same time, like someone breathing quickly in fear. He turned slowly, scanning the shadows. Then it happened. A small shape darted across the hallway, so fast his light barely caught it. His heart jumped. Someone was here. No, not someone something. Hello? His voice cracked slightly in the stale air. He cursed himself for speaking. The echo answered back, cold and hollow. He took a cautious step forward, his hand instinctively going to the small plasma cutter on his belt. The corridor opened into a wide chamber, the old crew quarters. The beam of his light swept across broken beds and scattered tools. And then he saw them eyes. Two glowing eyes reflecting his light from the corner. A figure crouched there, small, thin, clutching a piece of scrap metal like a weapon. It wasn't human, not fully. The skin was pale with a faint shimmer, and the eyes were too large, too bright. For a moment, they stared at each other, neither moving. The figure trembled, the sound of its frightened breathing filling the room. "It's okay," he said softly, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. The figure flinched at his voice, pressing itself against the wall. It looked young, like a child, though its alien features made it hard to tell. He took a slow step forward. The figure hissed softly, the sound low and desperate. In a flash, it scrambled backward and vanished into the vents. The clanging echoed as it disappeared into the walls. Leaving the room silent again, the human stood there, his chest rising and falling. What had he just seen? An alien living inside his abandoned ship? How long had it been here? He lowered his light and looked around. There were signs he had missed before. Empty ration packs, small claw marks on the floor, and a makeshift nest of blankets and old wires in the corner. Whoever or whatever it was had been living here for a long time. His grip tightened on the plasma cutter, not in anger, but in uncertainty. He had come for a spare part, a simple job. Now the ship wasn't just a dead shell of metal anymore. It had a secret, a life hiding within it. The silence of the ship felt different now. Heavier, alive. He could almost hear faint movements in the vents, the soft sound of someone trying not to be found. He exhaled slowly and sat on a broken crate, running a hand over his face. Leaving wasn't an option now. He couldn't just take what he needed and go. Not when something was in here alone, scared and surviving. Against the emptiness of space, he looked up at the dark vent where the glowing eyes had been. Somewhere behind the metal, the alien girl was hiding, clutching her scrap weapon and shaking in fear. "I don't know who you are," he whispered to the shadows, "but I'm not here to hurt you." His voice carried through the empty corridors, soft and steady, hoping she would hear. For a long moment, there was no answer. Then, somewhere deep inside the walls, a faint sound of movement, like someone listening. The human smiled faintly to himself. The ship wasn't abandoned anymore. It had a heartbeat again, and he was going to find out why. Asterisk. The human woke early to the soft hum of the ship's life support, trying to breathe again. His small repair drone had restored minimal power overnight, just enough to light the corridors. With a weak glow, the shadows seemed less heavy now, but the feeling of being watched never left. He moved carefully, every step slow and deliberate. His ears caught the faint sound of movement inside the walls, the soft scrape of claws against metal. She was still there, hiding, afraid. He set a small ration pack on the floor and backed away. He placed a water pouch next to it. His voice was calm and quiet. "Food, water for you." He knew she couldn't understand his words, but tone spoke louder than language. For hours, nothing happened. He sat against the cold wall, pretending to check his tools, pretending not to wait. The air was thick with silence until a faint click echoed from the vent. He held his breath. 2 glowing eyes appeared again, barely visible in the dim light. The small alien girl crawled halfway out of the vent, her thin frame shaking, her skin shimmered faintly like glass touched by starlight. She looked at the food, then at him. Her fingers tightened on the piece of scrap metal she carried. A weapon, or maybe just a shield. Slowly, she reached out and grabbed the ration pack. Her movements quick and nervous, she backed away instantly, retreating into the vent with the prize clutched to her chest. He exhaled a breath he didn't know. He had been holding a connection, small but real. He stayed still, listening to the soft sound of her eating in the dark. The sound was raw, desperate, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Maybe weeks. It twisted something inside him. This wasn't a monster. This was a child. Alone in the cold void, when she peeked out again, her large eyes were softer, less wild. He raised his hand slowly and drew a circle in the dust on the floor. Then he tapped his chest and pointed at himself. "Human," he said gently. She tilted her head, confusion and curiosity mixing on her face. She tapped her own chest hesitantly and made a soft, musical sound. A name or a word he couldn't understand. The sound was fragile, like the first note of a forgotten song. He smiled faintly and repeated it back. She blinked in surprise and made the sound again. Louder this time, a small step. But it was enough. The hours passed in a strange dance of gestures and sounds. He sketched crude drawings on the floor with a piece of metal. A planet, a ship, 2 stick figures. He pointed to the old vessel around them. Then to her. Her eyes dimmed and she hugged her knees. Through broken images and movements, he pieced together fragments of her story. A colony, gone. Fire in the sky. Escape pods scattering into the void. She must have found the abandoned ship drifting and claimed it as her shelter. The human felt a weight in his chest, imagining this fragile being wandering the cold corridors alone, surviving on whatever scraps she could find, hearing only her own footsteps in the silence. A sudden clang echoed from the far corridor. Sharp and metallic, she froze instantly, her glowing eyes wide with terror. She pressed a finger to her lips in a gesture universal across the stars. Silence. He didn't move. The air felt heavier, a low vibration humming through the floor. Something else was on the ship. The girl backed slowly into the vent, her hands trembling. She pointed toward the engine room and shook her head violently. The message was clear: danger. He swallowed hard, his hand drifting toward the plasma cutter on his belt. The ship wasn't just a shelter. It was a hiding place. And now he understood what she had been hiding from. The glowing eyes vanished into the dark of the vents, leaving him alone with the growing hum. The silence of the abandoned ship was no longer empty. It was waiting, watching. He stood slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The spare part he had come for felt meaningless now. The ship had secrets buried deep in its metal bones, and he was standing in the middle of them as he moved toward the sound. He glanced once more at the vent. He whispered softly, "I'll come back," hoping the alien girl would hear and believe it. The faintest echo of movement answered him, like a promise hidden in the shadows. The ship felt different now. no longer just an empty shell drifting in space. The human moved through the cold corridors carefully, every sound amplified in the stillness. He could feel her presence in the walls, the small alien girl watching him, following his steps from the hidden vents. He set another ration pack near the corner where she had appeared before. This time, he didn't back away far. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, waiting. Minutes passed, then the faint scrape of metal. Two glowing eyes peeked from the darkness, softer this time, not as wild. She crawled out slowly, her thin hands clutching the vent's edge. The faint shimmer of her skin caught the weak light, and for the first time, he noticed the faint marks across her arms, scratches and bruises, signs of survival in a place not meant for life. He slid the ration toward her with gentle hands. She hesitated, then took it. Her large eyes stayed on him as she ate, her movements quick, desperate, but quieter now. He could feel trust building, a fragile bridge between two beings who had never meant to meet. When she finished, he drew again in the dust, a small stick figure with round eyes. He tapped it and pointed to her. She tilted her head, then tapped her chest with a soft sound. The same word from before, her name. He repeated it slowly, carefully. Her eyes widened just a little, and she made a soft noise, almost like laughter. He tapped his own chest. Human, he said again. She tried to repeat the word, her voice shaky but clear. Who? Man. It was broken, but it was beautiful. In that moment, the cold ship didn't feel so empty anymore. Hours passed as they traded gestures and sounds. She learned simple words, pointing to things and waiting for him to name them. He learned fragments of her story through crude drawings and expressions. A colony on a distant world, fire raining from the sky, escape pods scattering like shooting stars. She had found this abandoned vessel drifting and claimed it as her only refuge. His chest tightened as he imagined her wandering these silent corridors, alone, frightened, surviving on scraps. Every creak of the metal must have sounded like a threat, every shadow a predator. A sudden vibration ran through the floor beneath them. The girl stiffened instantly, her glowing eyes wide. She pressed her fingers to her lips again, the silent plea for quiet. The human froze, listening. A low hum, faint but growing, like something waking deep within the ship. He reached slowly for the plasma cutter on his belt. His eyes met hers, and he saw pure fear. She crawled closer, her small hand grabbing his sleeve. She pointed toward the engine room again and shook her head violently. Her thin voice broke the silence, a single word in her language, sharp and trembling. He didn't know the meaning, but he understood danger. He nodded once, slowly, and she retreated halfway into the vent. Watching him with those glowing eyes, he whispered softly, "It's okay." Though he knew it wasn't. The hum faded after a long minute, leaving the ship in dead silence again. The human exhaled, his shoulders tense. Whatever it was, it hadn't gone away. It was still there, hiding deeper in the ship. He looked back at the girl, still crouched in the vent, her fingers white against the metal. She had been living with this thing for who knew how long. Hiding, surviving. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, he made a silent promise. He wasn't going to leave her here. He reached into his pack and placed a small glow stick on the floor. The faint green light filled the corridor, soft and warm. She touched it cautiously, her face glowing in the pale light. For the first time, she didn't retreat immediately. He smiled faintly. "Safe," he said softly. Tapping the floor, she tilted her head and repeated the sound. Sa-fe. The word lingered in the air, fragile but hopeful. He leaned back against the wall. The hum of the ship faint beneath him, somewhere in the dark. A predator was waiting. But for now, in this small corner of an abandoned ship, there was a spark of life, a story beginning in the shadows. Asterisk. The old ship groaned softly, as if it could feel their presence. The human moved carefully through the corridors now, every step measured. The alien girl stayed close, her glowing eyes following him from the vents. For the first time, she didn't run when he looked at her. He was trying to reach the engine room. The spare part he needed was there, but so were the strange vibrations and the hum that made the walls feel alive. He glanced back at the vent where she crouched, her small fingers gripping the metal tightly. She shook her head again, her face pale. "I have to check," he whispered. His voice sounded small in the vast silence. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The engine room smelled of burnt metal and old energy. The lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the floor. Something wasn't right. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. He moved his light slowly, scanning the walls. That's when he saw them. Deep scratches running along the metal like claws dragging through soft earth. The marks were fresh. His throat tightened. This wasn't just an old ship creaking in the void. Something else had been living here. Something that hunted. A soft sound echoed above him, scraping metal. He snapped his light upward, catching a glimpse of movement, disappearing into the dark pipes above. His fingers tightened on the plasma cutter instinctively. The girl hissed softly from the vent, a warning. He turned and saw her pointing frantically toward the far corner of the room, her glowing eyes wide with fear. He stepped back slowly, his boots silent against the floor. A low growl rolled through the air, deep and unnatural. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded alive. He retreated into the corridor, his heart pounding. The girl vanished into the vent. Moving quickly above him, he followed the sound of her light taps on the metal, her way of guiding him back toward safety. They stopped in an old crew quarters, the door sealed shut behind him. He leaned against the wall, his breath shaky. "What is it?" he whispered, knowing she couldn't understand. She crouched in the vent, hugging her knees, her body trembling. He sat down on the cold floor and looked at her, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe." She stared at him, her large eyes glistening in the faint light. Slowly, she reached out of the vent and touched the glow stick he had left earlier. The soft green light reflected in her skin like starlight. He studied her face, the small ridges along her temples, the faint shimmer of her skin. Whoever she wasn't just surviving. She was hiding from something that wanted her gone. He glanced at the closed door, listening to the distant hum of the ship. The sound felt closer now, heavier, like footsteps echoing through the metal bones of the vessel. The human understood something in that moment. This wasn't just an abandoned ship with a frightened child inside. It was a trap, and they were both caught in it. He pulled a broken panel from the wall and began drawing in the dust again, a crude shape of the creature he thought he had glimpsed in the pipes. He tapped it and looked at her. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head violently, drawing an X over the shape. She pressed her small hand to her chest, then pointed at him, then back to the creature. Her voice broke the silence, a single word in her language. It was sharp and trembling, but he understood the meaning behind her tone. Hunt. He exhaled slowly. The thing wasn't just living here. It was hunting, and she had been running from it since the moment she found this ship. He looked at her and nodded firmly. His voice was steady now. "We'll stop it." She tilted her head, confused, but his tone carried something her ears understood, determination. The lights flickered once. Then again, the hum grew louder in the distance. The human stood, his hand on the plasma cutter. His eyes met hers through the vent, and for the first time, she didn't look like a frightened child. She looked like a survivor. In the silence, the ship seemed to hold its breath. Again, waiting for the next move, somewhere deep inside the metal corridors, the hunter moved closer. The ship was no longer silent. It was breathing. Every sound echoed like a heartbeat in the hollow metal corridors. The human could feel it in his bones, the faint vibration under his boots. Something moving in the dark. He checked the plasma cutter, its soft glow the only comfort against the creeping shadows. The alien girl stayed above him in the vents, her small taps guiding his steps. She didn't speak, but he didn't need her words. Her fear was loud enough. The hum grew stronger. As they moved deeper, each corridor felt tighter, the air heavier. The lights flickered faintly, casting broken shadows across the walls. He remembered the scratches in the engine room, the low growl that had rolled through the air. Whatever lived here wasn't hiding anymore, it was hunting. They reached an intersection. The girl's glowing eyes appeared in the grate above. She pointed left, then quickly changed her mind and pointed right. Her movements were fast, panicked. The human froze, listening. A soft scraping sound came from the left corridor, slow and deliberate, metal against metal. Then a second sound followed from the right, heavier, closer. His heart skipped. There was more than one. He motioned for her to stay quiet and killed his light. Darkness swallowed the corridor. His ears strained against the silence. Then he heard it, a slow breath, deep and wet. Just beyond the corner, he backed into a storage room, pulling the door almost shut. The girl slipped silently through the vent and crouched above him. The sound of claws on metal crept closer. Each step made the air colder. The human could feel his pulse in his throat. He tightened his grip on the plasma cutter, his other hand covering the faint glow stick so only a thin green line leaked through his fingers. Then he saw it, a long shadow sliding across the floor under the door. The sound of breathing filled the narrow space. A faint hiss, low and hungry. The girl pressed her hand over her mouth, her small body trembling in the vent above him. For a moment, time froze, only the sound of the creature's breath filling the void. Then, slowly, the shadow moved away. The scraping faded into the distance. The human waited another long minute before exhaling. His whisper was barely a breath. "We can't stay here." The girl slid down from the vent silently, landing beside him. Her eyes met his, still glowing but now steady. She grabbed his sleeve and pointed toward the old reactor core on his map display. Her gestures were sharp and certain. "You want to trap it," he whispered. And though she couldn't understand the words, she nodded. Her small hands moved quickly, sketching in the dust with her fingers, crude lines showing the corridors and the power conduits. She tapped the old core and drew an X. He stared at the drawing, then at her. This child had been surviving this nightmare long enough to know the creature's patterns. She had a plan, and now so did he. They moved silently, following the map she had drawn. Every step felt like a countdown. The ship groaned as if warning them. The faint hum of the creature moving through the walls followed them like a ghost. When they reached the reactor chamber, the air was thick and warm. The old core pulsed weakly. Still holding enough energy to spark one last trap, he began wiring the conduits manually, his hand steady even as his heart raced. The girl crouched near the vent, her ears twitching at every sound. Suddenly, her eyes widened. She hissed a sharp warning. The scraping was close again. Too close. He worked faster, sweat sliding down his neck. The hum of the reactor grew louder as he overloaded the circuits. A faint spark lit the dark room. The girl grabbed his arm and pulled, pointing to the corridor. The sound of claws slammed against the metal floor. The creature was running now. He slammed the final conduit into place and grabbed the girl. They dove into the vent just as the reactor chamber door burst open with a metallic scream. A roar filled the ship, deep and furious. The sound shook the metal walls. Then came a blinding flash of light, the overloaded core releasing a wave of energy that ripped through the chamber. The vent rattled violently around them, heat brushed against their skin, then silence. The human lay still in the vent, breathing hard. The girl clung to him, her thin frame shaking. Slowly, they both opened their eyes. The faint green glow of the stick lit her face, her wide eyes reflecting the light. He managed a weak smile. "We're alive," he whispered. She blinked, her lips moving slowly. "Say, Fe." For the first time since he stepped onto the abandoned ship, he believed the word, asterisk. The silence after the explosion felt heavy. The ship's metal walls groaned as if they were exhaling after holding their breath for too long. The human stayed still in the vent, his arms around the small alien girl. Her thin frame trembled against him, but her glowing eyes were open. watching the faint green light of the glow stick. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The heat from the blast faded slowly, leaving only the cold emptiness of space pressing against the hull. He shifted slightly and whispered, "It's over," but deep inside, he knew it wasn't. The girl looked at him, her lips parting to speak a broken word. Sa-fe. It was the second time she had said it, and for the second time, he wanted to believe her. They crawled out of the vent carefully. The reactor chamber was a mess of twisted metal and burnt wires. Smoke drifted in the air like a thin fog. The hum of the ship had gone quiet, almost too quiet. He scanned the shadows. The plasma cutter still ready in his hand. The creature was gone, or at least it wasn't moving anymore. He wasn't sure if the blast had killed it or just forced it deeper into the ship. Either way, they had bought time. The girl stood beside him, her small hand gripping his sleeve. He looked down at her and saw something new in her eyes, not just fear but trust, fragile and soft. She had been alone for so long, hiding in the cold corridors. Now she wasn't alone anymore. He crouched and pointed at the old navigation map on his wrist display. He tapped the docking bay and then tapped his chest. "We need to leave." She watched him, then nodded slowly. Her small fingers traced the path on the map, avoiding the darker sections of the ship. She knew the safe routes better than anyone. As they moved through the corridors, he noticed the signs of her life here. A small corner turned into a nest of old blankets, scratched drawings on the wall that looked like stars, little signs of a child trying to hold onto something human in an inhuman place. He stopped for a moment and touched one of the drawings gently. The girl froze, watching him. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Home." She tilted her head and then repeated the word softly, "Home." The sound made the cold ship feel warmer for a heartbeat. They reached the junction near the storage bay when the metal beneath their feet vibrated again. The girl stiffened instantly, her glowing eyes wide. The silence broke with a faint scraping sound in the distance. Low and slow, he cursed under his breath. The creature wasn't dead. The girl grabbed his hand suddenly. Not just his sleeve this time. Her small fingers clung tightly to his. He looked down and met her gaze. She wasn't just scared. She was telling him something without words. "We survived together," he whispered. And though she didn't understand the words, she squeezed his hand tighter. They moved quickly, the sound of the creature echoing behind them. The ship felt alive again, but not in a way that brought comfort. It was a maze of shadows and danger. When they reached the docking bay, the human began prepping the small craft. His hands moved fast, wiring the systems manually. He could hear the faint growl of the creature getting closer. The girl stood near the door, her small frame tense. Her glowing eyes scanned the dark corridor. She picked up a piece of metal from the floor, holding it like a weapon. Her thin arms shook, but she didn't back away. The human looked at her, surprised by her courage. "Brave," he whispered. Softly, she turned her head slightly, confusion in her eyes. He tapped his chest. "Brave," and then pointed to her. Her lips moved slowly, mimicking the word. "Big." "Rave." The sound of claws against metal slammed through the hallway, closer now. He powered the craft with a loud hum. The girl ran to him and climbed into the small cabin. He sealed the hatch and grabbed the controls, just as the docking bay door screeched open. A massive shadow moved in the dark. The creature roared, its voice a mix of hunger and fury. The human didn't look back. He slammed the thrusters. The small craft tore free from the old ship, leaving the metal beast behind, inside the cabin. The hum of the engines filled the silence. The girl sat beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting the stars. For the first time, her small hand reached for his without fear. He held it gently and whispered, "Safe." Her voice was soft but sure this time. Safe. And for the first time since he stepped onto that abandoned ship, he knew it was true. The stars stretched endlessly outside the small craft, each one a distant fire, cold and unreachable. The human sat in the pilot's seat, his hands still trembling slightly on the controls. The hum of the engines was steady now, a soft sound of survival. Beside him, the small alien girl sat curled in the seat, her glowing eyes staring out into the void. For the first time since he found her, her body wasn't tense. She looked tired but calm, like a storm finally fading into quiet. He glanced at her and smiled faintly. "We made it," he whispered. His voice was soft, more to himself than to her. She turned her head slowly, her lips parting to speak. "Safe." The word carried more weight now, not just a sound, but a promise. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. His mind replayed everything, the empty corridors, the glowing eyes. In the dark, the hum of the hunters stalking them. And now here they were, alive. The girl shifted slightly and pointed at the stars. Her voice was small, but she spoke another word in her language. It was soft, musical, and he didn't know what it meant. But the way she looked at him made him understand hope. He tapped his chest gently. "Human," then tapped hers, saying her name. She blinked and repeated softly, "Who?" "Man." Then she touched her chest and said her name again with more strength. For the first time, her voice didn't shake. He nodded, his chest warming in the cold of space. Names didn't matter out here, but in that moment, theirs did. The craft systems beeped softly, a warning about low power. He frowned and glanced at the map. They were drifting far from the old ship, but still deep in the void. No colonies, no stations nearby. Survival wasn't finished yet. He looked at her, her small hands resting on her knees. She had been surviving alone in the cold dark for so long, and now she was looking at him as if waiting for what came next. He smiled faintly. "Together," he whispered, tapping his chest and then hers. She tilted her head, repeating the word slowly. J. Thur. It sounded broken, but it felt whole. He began setting coordinates for the nearest trade route, hoping to find a passing ship. His fingers moved over the controls, but his thoughts stayed on her. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a responsibility. The girl leaned against the seat, her glowing eyes blinking slowly. Her small frame trembled once, then went still as she drifted into sleep. The faint shimmer of her skin reflected the light of the stars, fragile and beautiful. He looked out at the void and let himself breathe. The abandoned ship was far behind now, just another ghost floating in endless space. But it had given him something unexpected. Not just a spare part, not just a story of survival, but a life. A connection born in shadows. The human reached over and gently adjusted the blanket around her small shoulders. She stirred slightly, murmuring something soft in her language. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She trusted him. As the engines hummed and the stars slid past, he realized this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, beyond the cold and the dark, was a place where they could both belong. A place where she wouldn't have to hide in vents or sleep with fear in her eyes. A place where safe wasn't just a word whispered in the dark, but a reality. He smiled faintly and whispered to the sleeping girl, "We'll find it." Her glowing eyes stayed closed, but her lips moved slightly, repeating the one word they both now shared, "Safe." The human turned back to the controls, the soft sound of her breathing mixing with the steady hum of the engines. The void stretched endlessly ahead, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a path, a promise, a new beginning.